I was going to start by just having you guys kind of introduce yourselves, tell us about your background, and tell us what led to these roles at the MED that you guys are currently in.
Sure. Good evening. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Great.
Speak pretty direct.
All right, thank you. Again, my name is Dominique Mendiola, Deputy Director for the Marijuana Enforcement Division. I joined the MED in 2014, shortly after retail marijuana came online, and a little bit after Jim, is now the director, joined MED. So we've worked really closely together over the years. Prior to joining the division, I was practicing law in Texas and Colorado, focused primarily in civil litigation. I had always had an interest in administrative law, so regulatory administrative law particularly, and so when I returned to Colorado, I saw it as an opportunity for me to shift my focus. And another note, I had, for a period of time, worked for the San Antonio Police Department, particularly focused on crisis intervention and outreach. And what really spoke to me with the opportunity within the MED was both the administrative law piece as well as the outreach and advocacy that was available, and where we were a baby agency. I think we still are. And so there was a real opportunity to engage and support the development of the organization as we continue to grow. Under the prior administration, I did, for a period of time, I was appointed as the Director of Marijuana Coordination under Governor Hickenlooper, and remained in that role until for the remainder of the administration, before our current governor, Polis, joined and took office. And that was an opportunity for me to return to the MED, thank you, Jim, to continue to support all the work that we're doing with this community.
Good evening, Jim Burack. We'll fight over the mic, I guess, tonight. But yeah, as Dominique said, she was working over at the governor's office, so effectively she was my boss, and then she came back, and now I have the opportunity to tell her what to do. But see. Anyway, hey, it's a real privilege to be here. Mike, you probably wrote to me initially well more than a year ago, and you stopped me. But as I called you, I kept your email on the front of my desk because I knew I was going to call you back. And so it's just it's a privilege again to be here with you tonight. I've been. Hey, what's the definition of OG? How many years do you need in the cannabis community? 10. I'm halfway there. I joined, just after retail came online, 2014. I came from sort of a checkered background of a bunch of different things. The Marine Corps, if there are any Marines out there, we always have, this is the obligatory, all right, I got one paw in the air. I was in municipal law enforcement for a number of years. I've worked on Capitol Hill in the U.S. Senate. I've worked in the ski industry for a lot of years. So and then in municipal management as a town manager for 5 years. So I have sort of a diverse background. I will tell you, having started in municipal law enforcement here in Colorado 34 years ago, I probably did not imagine that I would be sitting here in Rhino, which I guess wouldn't have been called Rhino 34 years ago, that I would be sitting here with this, joining you and the cannabis community and the role that we're in. So maybe that sort of goes into part of the conversation we're having, but it's an extraordinary evolution. And again, thanks for the welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys. And kind of very on the topic of what you're kind of saying of where you guys are at, I was just kind of curious on your personal feelings on being in this position. Do you guys see cannabis as something that is a very exciting, opportunity? Did you kind of both speak to Jim's surprise to be in it? You kind of felt a calling a little bit to, there's an opportunity here. So I'm just curious, how much is this, you guys are regulators, you could regulate many different things. Do you find, is there a special place in your heart for the cannabis industry, or are you just there as a public service role?
Well, the public service aspect, I think, is really important, and having that commitment to public service, but also the fact that we all have to be very dynamic and particularly when we have licensee stakeholders working in an industry, we acknowledge that there are some really unique challenges that come with regulatory environment that is still new, where Colorado has been the leader in being very deliberate in establishing a framework. And we often speak to the fact that one critical piece to that, to the success and the continued success, is the stakeholder engagement that we've had. I think that is really unique. It truly is a community, and that collaboration has been really important.
See if I can say something as profound as Dominique. I mean, I remember when I first started in 2014, saying that I came sort of from the community policing world, if some of you are familiar with sort of that concept. And I remember saying very early on that it sort of felt like this was, there's a community here. And what I've noticed is that there's truly been an evolution in those 5 years. And in some ways, to sort of sit in this crowd, in this forum, and to see what has evolved in 5 years is really been a journey. And to be able to be part of that, to be able to be part of that conversation, to I think, and I look out in the crowd here. There are a number of friends out there who we've worked with closely for 5 years, who've shared that responsibility for bringing this industry and this framework to the point that we've gotten to here in 2019.
What's the day-to-day for each of you? Jim, you can start. Like, what is the focus of your roles, each of you, and what comes across your desk every day? I'm always interested in that.
Mike, you didn't give me this question ahead of time, so I didn't.
Well, what did you do today?
Yeah, what I did. No, I mean, I think Dominique said it earlier. The focus clearly. One is there's about the organization. It's about, and Dominique said it earlier. It was sort of a baby agency, which kind of hurt my feelings a little bit. But we are growing. We have had to stand up from effectively almost 10 years ago from ground zero to build a new organization which is capable of supporting and managing and ensuring that this industry is, we're accountable, we're legitimate, we're credible. And I think at the end of the day, we've created a reputation, we've created a national, you all have created together, we've created a system, I think, that has an international reputation, and you all know that because folks come from all over the world to come talk to you and hear about the success that we've had together. So one of those things is creating that organization and building that. And trust me, it's a challenge. I mean, we're working with HR systems and trying to find the right people and working on all those things that all of you who run organizations know how complex that can be. And the second part, I'd say that probably the most important thing, it's contributing to how do we build this community and how do we end up ensuring that we're supporting that stakeholder engagement, which I think if there's one single thing that we've done the best in Colorado, and I think when we go around the country and we talk to other states that probably you all do and talking to industry folks nationally, that they look at us, and I think the way that we have convened this kind of, and built this kind of community, that animates my day. And that's about a series of meetings, being responsive, and trying to make sure that we're adapting to the requirements of the industry.
So, and to add to that, it really depends on the time of year. I mean, when we just completed a legislative session, we're getting, and that is a 24/7, it is all consuming, and it goes to the collaboration that's required to ensure that we're setting the framework that or concept that's reflected in a bill that's introduced in the legislative session for success. So I think throughout you will see a collaborative piece to it. But when we're engaged in the legislative session, and particularly for Jim and I, our role is to be involved in the process, support the process, engage with proponents of the bills, provide feedback, testify to the General Assembly, and answer questions and provide recommendations to ensure that we can, if the bill were to pass and we were charged with implementing it, then we can do that in an operable, successful way. At this point, now that the legislative session is finished, we are preparing for implementation. That all has a timeline associated with it, so we have to now look at the statutory requirements associated with bills that have passed, most of which are still pending the governor's signature, but we were engaged throughout the entire legislative session, so now we are at a point that we can begin planning for the implementation process, which will be throughout the summer. We're going to be announcing stakeholder engagements, working groups. We're going to be soliciting participants. That's all stuff that we're working on actively right now, and looking at what that schedule is going to look like at the end of the day between June and through September. So I envision to see a lot of these faces in the process.
Awesome. So speaking of legislation, as well as Jim said, other states and the model we've set, it feels like sometimes we definitely set a big model and got way out ahead, and we have, I would say, the most stable industry here in Colorado compared with all these others. How do you balance, or how does not only the MED but the legislatures that you talk to, how do we still be innovative when other states are moving in directions like home delivery or, a lot of other different types of licenses, social consumption, tasting rooms, that kind of stuff? How does your organization or the people you work with, how do you see that balance between innovation and not letting us be the boring, maybe you guys want us to be the boring cannabis state, but I think a lot of the industry wants to leap forward and do a lot of these new things. Do you guys also, from your institutional perspective, want to do some of those new things, or would you rather it stay very calm as much as possible? How do you balance this?
I think one of the things that has drawn us, or at least keeps us here, is the fact that it's very dynamic. There are new things that we're navigating, new issues or challenges that we're navigating on a daily basis. And when we are talking about things like home delivery and consumption or tasting rooms or hospitality establishments, those are conversations we've had over the years where we've seen bills with similar concept introduced over the years. So for us, the way that, and I'm not going to speak for Jim.
You can.
I know, I can for this. So, the way that we approach our work is that our job is to implement the will of the voters. So we are working off of our state constitution and the direction of the General Assembly. And we're here to support that process in a way that can ensure that we're all successful here. And part of that is ensuring that we have the right people in our organization. We have evolved, Jim has really initiated the process over the years and helping our organization evolve in a way that we can continue to be supportive of all the discussions we have with our licensee stakeholders with all the new issues that come up. I can say that the idea of a routine day is not what would keep me here.
Let me talk a little bit about that sort of stability, dynamism, attention, I guess. And I think we recognize that, at some level, sure, we all seek stability in the marketplace. We want a level playing field. We need consistency. You all are making business decisions, and you're looking out over, over a time frame, a time horizon, because that's how you make, business plans. So we understand that, and that's something I think we're committed to understanding where you are. At the same time, I think as Dominique alluded to, we take direction from the General Assembly at the end of the day, and we are fully prepared to execute. And this summer, as Dominique said, working with you, we've got a busy rulemaking schedule, and we've got some pretty significant pieces of legislation that we're going to go through rulemaking, and we're going to implement, and we're going to do it successfully, and we're going to do it right. So, the sense, Mike, that we're fearful, or that we're behind the scenes trying to ensure the status quo is definitely far from the truth. I will tell you, the 100+ folks who work at MED, for the most part, we're a pretty courageous, bold, I should use the word bold, group of folks who are willing to work in a new organization, in a new industry, with a certain amount of uncertainty. And so I think we look forward to the challenge of new concepts.
And just to add to that, this legislative session, the department often will take a particular communicative position on legislation that's introduced, while we normally will communicate a neutral position on bills that are introduced in the legislative session. We did for the most part this session as well, with one exception, the House Bill 1090, the publicly traded company bill. This is commonly referred to as, although it does really change the ownership and investment framework in Colorado. That is a bill that we were supportive of and communicated that to the General Assembly.
Can you say a little more about what that does?
Sure.
Why you were supportive?
So the bill really works to streamline the ownership and investment framework in Colorado. Under current law, before this bill takes effect, statute provides that every interest, direct or indirect, must be disclosed and approved if we're talking about ownership and investment in the marijuana business. So we have seen over the years how this has been not just challenging for our licensee stakeholders, but creates some challenges internally as far as looking for efficiencies. So this really creates some efficiencies by establishing what control is by looking at a percentage of shares or ownership shares or securities in a marijuana business, and that threshold is at 10%. So it's if you have 10% or more shares or interest in a marijuana business, then you fall into that control category, and then you're subject to disclosure and suitability requirements. The other part of that is if somebody who has day-to-day control over the decision-making or operations of a business, no matter the percentage, that would also fall into the control category.
So that's more disclosure required than common businesses. You can have 10 or 15% of control in a pizza shop and you don't have all the hoops. Is that what we're saying? That this is trying to streamline all the hoops you have to jump through, and that previously, if you had 10% or more, there was a lot more involved, and you guys are trying to...
Or less, at any percentage,
okay.
No matter the percentage.
Is this raising it to 10%?
It's creating that threshold now, the trigger of
Gotcha.
what is control, what triggers that disclosure and suitability requirement, and then who would be exempt from the process. And so it also creates 3 different categories of interest, as opposed to, I think under our current structure, it's like 7. So it's looking to simplify, looking to provide more clarity, really focusing ultimately on who controls the business, and then providing some flexibility and exemptions to the process.
And you supported it because not only it streamlines it, but is this going to open the door to more capital investment in this industry? Or
that was another big focus, as well as providing opportunities for more capital under our current law as well. One of the other focuses of this bill was publicly traded company ownership or investment. Under our current law, publicly traded companies are expressly prohibited from participating as an owner in Colorado. So this eliminates that prohibition in a way that allows other market participants to come in and provides more opportunities for access to capital. We're also looking at, in this bill, private investment vehicles, so venture capital, what's the other one? Private equity. So looking at really balancing that out, so while we often call it a publicly traded PubCo bill, this really is broader than that, and is something that we've seen and believe that will create some efficiencies, both internally and externally.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, and I'd say, Mike, I think this bill, the way it will end up being structured in rule, will end up setting to some measure the model nationally for how investment is done in the industry. And there's no question, you all know that there are various models out there across the country, but I think Colorado's going to sort of set the pace here with what we end up creating this summer in rule with the General Assembly's guidance.
Awesome. Anything else that came out of this legislative session that you guys will be implementing? What else do we, without getting too in the weeds of the regulatory stuff, what else should the industry kind of be aware of that's coming down the line?
Sure. So there is a home delivery bill, as well as what we're calling a hospitality establishment. So for home delivery, this will allow for medical marijuana home delivery in the first year. And the following year, there will be the allowance for issuing licenses for retail or adult use delivery. So we're going to have a working group that's dedicated to that, as well as the hospitality bill. that allows for both. There's the consumption-only license, and all of these would be subject to local licensing authority approval. But this creates two different license types. One is a hospitality, so no commercial sales, it's a bring your own concept. You get a license and allow for consumers to come in and bring their own product and consume on site. And then there's the hospitality and sales establishment that would allow for the commercial sales.
And those all passed and are
Those
now
all
in the...
passed. Those are currently pending the governor's signature. And we also have the sunset bill that reviewed so right now we have the medical marijuana code, the medical statute, and then the retail marijuana code. This bill merges it into one code and makes, based on recommendations from the Department of Regulatory Agencies, makes a number of changes to statute to really with a focus more on creating some efficiencies, some business efficiencies. So there will be a lot of changes that we're going to be implementing based on this legislation. So we will have working groups throughout the summer that are open to the public. We're going to be soliciting people to come to the table and participate and contribute to those discussions. So if you are not signed up through our website to get those notifications, please do that because we want to hear from our stakeholders.
I was going to also ask, so there's, your primary purpose, I suppose, is implementing the will of the voters, and public safety is kind of like top level, and then supporting a bill like you just mentioned is about streamlining the industry, making the industry more business friendly and more healthy. What about some of the goals that are, the industry cares about, but that aren't in line with business or public safety? And so the two that come to mind for me are, diversity in this industry and not letting this industry just be totally taken over by, the moneyed interests that have run, most of the industries. And the second one being, and I heard some feedback from people when I was asking for questions, was sustainability, right? A lot of the regulatory framework forces all these pieces of plastic, all this waste. So how much do these kind of secondary, they're not straight to the goal, but they're still important and something that this industry cares about, on a deep level? Is that something that comes into the conversations, those two or other matters like that?
Yeah, I would say often. And some of those that you spoke to were addressed this legislative session as well. In the sunset bill, we did have some outreach from a stakeholder who wanted to explore opportunities around recycling. And we have, over really the past year, have noticed a lot more focus on recycling, just general sustainability. And so this was a good opportunity for us to say, okay, here's what if we were just looking to clarify through our regulations, this is what we could really accomplish. If you're looking at these other opportunities, this is where there would be a statutory change that's required. So making sure that we're having those discussions with stakeholders to understand really where the opportunities lie, if there is a need for a statutory change to address things like that. But there were some amendments to the sunset bill that incorporate some recycling opportunities that we're going to be working on this summer. We work really closely with our partner agencies, other departments around the state, the Department of Public Health and Environment, Department of Agriculture, Public Safety, Transportation. We work really closely with them, and so that's where we have seen opportunities to identify what we're hearing from stakeholders, what we can prioritize, and help in our engagements look at best practices that we can work on, resources we can create for our licensee stakeholders that can support compliance as opposed to just an inspection, but something that we can produce and say, here, this is the conversation we had, these are the things we see that are going really well, here are some suggestions on things that, here's some resources we have that can maybe help you incorporate some best practices into your business.
Social equity. I think we've actually together made some pretty significant progress at the General Assembly. Has provided some guidance this session, particularly related to social equity in Sunset, and it was something that MED was actively engaged in early conversations about looking at some of the sort of statutory preclusions that have existed effectively since the beginning of time, particularly around criminal histories. And it was around felony arrests. And so effectively what's happened with Sunset is that's going to move to a three-year preclusion from the 5 or 10-year rule previously. We think that's probably going to be a pretty significant factor for a number of our applicants and provide an entryway into the industry. That's one. The other piece of Sunset is talking about the accelerator mechanism that's embedded in there. That's going to be something that we're going to be talking about probably in depth at rulemaking about exactly how that's going to work. But there's basically an accelerator provision. Give me the language, the terms that we're using for the license. So anyway, there'll be an accelerator license, and then you'll have sort of micro licenses that can operate within that accelerator. But we're working through that, and maybe some of you will be at the table with us.
An accelerator, like a business accelerator license? Or? Yeah.
So the Sunset Bill established a couple different license types, so to go back to this accelerator concept, and this applies to manufacturing facilities and cultivations that would essentially allow for a large business that has the ability to bring somebody in, a smaller micro license type concept, to bring somebody in maybe with less overhead, and it's a separate license that we'd be issuing to the new licensee coming in to operate in this endorsed accelerator business.
Like a big kitchen, maybe, that the big kitchen holds the license, and there's a lot of micro edible companies that get to take a shot at it without having to have the capital requirements and all that. Is that what we're saying?
Generally, yes. Now, again, the bill establishes the license types, gives some general guidance, but really all the details will be worked out through the rulemaking session.
Cool. I was going to say we are going to do a little audience Q&A. I'm going to ask probably 2 more questions, but if anybody has some questions, we'll be turning to you guys soon. We don't want to dive too deep into very specific why is this regulation this way, but if you guys have any questions that you think the whole audience would like to hear some response from these folks who came out to talk to us tonight, start thinking about that now. I was going to ask as well, how you mentioned stakeholders a lot. How can there's a lot of tiny companies in cannabis. There's larger companies that kind of probably work with you guys by default a little bit more. But how can people engage with you guys more? We're really excited to have you here tonight. Or is there going to be more events like this that they can come talk to you at? Or my email sat for a while, but clearly you guys made an effort to come speak with us, and we appreciate it. So is that something that we can look forward to more of?
It's because you didn't send the email to me. You sent it to me. Just kidding.
Yeah, sure. One thing I am a little pain tonight because you put it on the website, right? And Dominique got a lot more likes on the website. It hurt my heart.
I guess you're the boss. You got to take that. You're the director.
It's not too often that Jim gets to be the eye candy at events. So to participate in yes, we are, beyond just the rulemaking process, we are always looking for ways to conduct outreach, to hear from our stakeholders, and so we anticipate there will be other opportunities that we'll be announcing to the public to bring people together and have conversations just like this, and identify who else we want in the room, other departments, depending on the issues that come up. So we are going to be working with other departments to do that. Now, if you aren't already signed up through our website with the Marijuana Enforcement Division, there's a Contact Us part of the website that gives you an opportunity to sign. You just sign up to receive updates. You can find it pretty easily if you just go to the Contact Us section. It also has both of our contact information, so you can track us down pretty easily. But email Jim. So if you do that, that's where we're going to be sending all of our updates. And it's not just rulemaking stuff, it's outreach opportunities, engagements, rulemaking, legislative updates, their industry bulletins, compliance tips. That's what we use to send all messaging out to our licensees. So if you're not signed up, whether you're a licensee or not, it's a great way to get updates and just stay on top of what we're working on.
let me just add, obviously industry groups are really helpful to us, and there are a number of, groups that we work with that sort of collate some of those industry concerns, and so that's helpful at one level. One thing I just want to point out is, if many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with the Administrative Procedures Act. It's, Rachel loves reading the APA. But that's what sort of guides Dominique's life, particularly over the next few months, because we're doing rulemaking. But one provision is, it's about providing feedback to that rulemaking that Dominique referred to. But if you write some language or give us some feedback during rulemaking, we particularly Dominique, we read every single one of that input, and it's taken seriously. It is drilled into. So if you have input, I encourage you to send it in, because I've watched the process between MED and the AG's office, the amount of time that MED staff spends looking at that stuff and making sure that your input is considered and incorporated is pretty extraordinary.
And Jim will often say, he'll refer to like giving us digits. So when we're having conversations and in rulemaking, for example, and somebody describes an issue or points to a rule that maybe isn't clear to them, and they believe that we could stand to clarify it further, even if it's an existing rule or a proposed rule that we're discussing. Jim will comment, can you give us some digits then? Tell us what it should look like. And there are quite a bit of times when somebody provides that to us, we will take the language as it's written and put it straight into the rules. So where there are opportunities to clarify, simplify, we want to be able to do that, and we ideally want to know what you think it should look like.
Last question from me anyway. What are you guys excited about in the industry? Not just what's coming out this summer, but where do you think that this can go, or where would you like to see, with the guidance of regulatory framework and all that over the next year or two? Or what are you excited about to see from this industry?
Well, where we have seen in prior legislative sessions, some of these same concepts introduced throughout, and now being at a point where those concepts that we've seen repeated in prior years, with those bills having passed, and following our implementation of it, thinking about where we might be able to get to a point of, instead of every legislative session going through this process again, really having an opportunity to refine and to talk through existing regulations and processes, what we can work together to simplify. We're talking about licensing processes, where we can look at risk-based approaches to things beyond just legislative requirements, but thinking about how we can continue to work smarter and engage with our stakeholders as a part of that process outside of just the rulemaking.
Wait, this was the softball for Mike, so we could.
Okay.
No, we want to follow up a little bit on as Dominique said, about how we provide customer service. One of the big initiatives I think over this coming year is going to be how do we enhance the technology that we're using to make the customer, the licensee and applicant experience easier, quicker, more efficient for all of you. And so hopefully those of you, the OGs particularly, who've watched this, the arc of the last decade, I think we've gotten a lot better. But we've got a lot of things in store that I think we're going to get even more efficient and make, the extent that you all can do things online and you don't have to, even though we love seeing you at MED and in our offices around the state, I know many of you would probably prefer to do it online. So those are some of the things we're working on. Let me say one other thing about, I think what we're seeing over this next year that we're all going to be engaged in. That's sort of about this continuing sort of cannabis, hemp, marijuana, convergence definition, and what is this going to look like for all of us in the coming year? And obviously, as the sort of farm bill is being implemented, in the coming months and in years, what are the implications for all of us? And I think that's one of the things that we're going to be tracking pretty closely to try to understand it better and see where the lanes and where things are going to converge for all of us.
Awesome. We'll now open it up to a few questions from the audience. Does anybody have something they'd like to throw towards the directors of the MED here? Cool. I'm going to walk since I've got the mobile microphone here.
Mike, find an easy one.
All right, I'll do my best, I guess.
All right, thank you very much. So you just mentioned the Farm Bill, which is my particular interest is in sort of following the legalization nationally of the Farm Bill, but being that it's federally legalized, this state-by-state adoption of that is going to look very different in different places. If I'm trying to be a Colorado-based business that wants to go national with a industrial hemp business that's sanctioned federally, what are your views on the propagation of those laws, the ability to scale nationally? What does that look like in the next 2 years?
Jim
That sounds like a dumb Wow. No, I mean, what I will do is we will contact CDA, Department of Agriculture, tomorrow, and we will get you on the rulemaking committee with CDA so you can help them. And you probably already engaged with that. Is that fair?
Not yet, but I could.
You should be, because you sound like you know what you're talking about. So, but I think there's a larger question here about exactly the complexity of hemp and marijuana, and we had a lot of conversations this past year about testing. Dominique is the expert on this testing issue. Let me just be very clear though. MED is focused on marijuana. We are not the hemp folk. That's Department of Agriculture and it's the Department of Public Health and Environment. And so we are very conscious about ensuring that we're staying in our lane. And I think the marijuana industry is sensitive to that. I think frankly the hemp industry is sensitive to that. And so I think that it requires this conversation among CDA and CDPHE, obviously MED, DOR, and the governor's office to make sure at the state level that we're supporting that conversation around the implementation of the Farm Bill. So that was a perfect non-answer. Well, good luck with that. Gary.
All right, another question?
Yeah. Thanks. So we talked about the social equity issues in business ownership licensing, but as an attorney, I see around the state, especially rural areas, a lot of issues that are really important to the public there, because a lot of them have public hearings, is we hear questions about why aren't you hiring local people to work in our facilities? You're bringing in this huge marijuana industry into our very rural area, and we're not seeing the benefits of that on our local population. And in my experience, I've had to educate them to say, we have this occupational badge situation. Everybody has to have an occupational badge, and in order to do that, you have to travel far and wide to one of 4 offices in order to do that. So as it relates to the last thing you talked about, the streamlining, are we going to see any sort of streamlining to impact the social equity of the employees of the industry, so that way they're more easily able to get into this industry and get their foot in the door, like they talked about for hemp temps? There's a lot of folks out there that want to keep, they may not have fully embraced the cannabis culture here in the state, but they understand that their localities are getting a lot of money from it. And the concern that I've seen, at least from the locals, is that the folks in the industry, they're unable to get into the industry because they have to do a lot of paperwork, they have to travel. Right now I have clients who have, employees who are trying to get an occupational badge, and they have an appointment for 2 months from now. And so people have to pay their bills, and they want to get into this industry. So I didn't know if there was some sort of streamlining that was coming from the top down to help the employees of the industry.
And so those are conversations we're having actively right now. One, Jim spoke to technology, so ways, and we just had a meeting this week about occupational licensing and some of the scheduling timeframes for different offices, and what resources we could look to make it easier, or to provide more flexibility for individuals looking to get an occupational license or renew their occupational license. So those are active discussions that we're having right now. And there was mention of the criminal history prohibitions under current law, where the sunset did eliminate the 10-year felony prohibition, and with the 5-year, reduced it to 3 years, and that applies across the board, so that we anticipate could remove some of the barriers that currently exist and challenges.
Yeah, and Rachel, that's a great point. I mean, this is one of the values of coming out and having conversations and being sort of reminded that, you know, social equity can look, you know, it can look different in different places around the state. And, you know, I'll tell you, we were down in Alamosa a few months ago. We did outreach where we went and we had industry meetings and meetings with local licensing authorities. And it was some of those issues. It was about that ability to do licensing, you know, on an online platform that clearly is something that we need to be focused on. So, you know, as far as weights like that, we are very sensitive to it. And I hate to make a pledge in public. I shouldn't.
Do it. Do it. Do it.
I'm just saying, we will. This will be safe because we are going to reduce those wait times. It's high on the priority list. There are a whole number of challenges which I could go into offline, but you can imagine anyone who runs an organization and the challenges in 2019 in Colorado in this employment market and all sorts of other issues. But that's something that we're attacking vigorously. But as it relates to social equity, it's a great point. So thanks.
Yeah, I also, when I posted the Colorado Badge Network, if you guys are aware of that, the Facebook group with badged employees, that was one thing that was mentioned and liked a lot about the wait times for a badge. So I think they will be happy to hear that that's something you guys are aware of. And the online systems and the technology you're talking about sounds like that could go as part of the solution there.
Takes time, though, as anyone knows.
Takes time.
Technology projects take time, but we're working on things internally.
Anybody in the back part of the room want to ask some questions? Cool, I'll make the trip here.
Uh-oh. Those are like stuff to
Hi, I'm David. So as the national cannabis footprint expands, what are the considerations for looking at reciprocal out-of-state licenses? So as, you know, an investor comes in from Florida, or as an investor comes in from another state that's legal as well, what's the considerations of that? For the financial industry, it's kind of, you apply for a reciprocal license. Same should apply for cannabis as well in med badges.
So is the idea having been issued a license as an owner in one state, being able to go through one process with one state and that applying to other states?
That could also on more of a consultative approach as well. I mean, you know, for different types of licenses for out of state, and almost like a system that allows for out of state applicants to be able to utilize either consultative, you know, consultative approaches for those cannabis companies as well.
Well, what I can say is that we have regular discussions with other states, and really beginning with Washington, Oregon, Alaska. That's where our initial communications began, and really collaboration, and it has since expanded quite a bit. And almost, you know, weekly we talk to our counterparts in other states and have had discussions around where we can find alignment. You know, things like packaging and labeling or a universal symbol. Just where can we explore and prioritize certain regulatory things that can provide some ease for both industry members and our regulators.
You know, and I can expand on that a little bit. You know, we have a roundtable with all the states that come together regularly. We talk on the phone regularly. I think, you know, there'll be a time when we'll think back to May 2019. We're sitting here, and you know, there are clearly statutory hurdles. There are legal hurdles to doing what you're talking about. There's at some logical level that certainly makes sense. I think we all, as state regulators, when we come together, are conscious of the fact that someday we will think back to this time when we didn't have a uniform code, we didn't have some model code that's being adopted across multiple states. I think that is something that we're going to see someday. Testing is another area that, you know, science sort of is universal, right, Frank? You know, and I would imagine you all get together with, you know, testing folks nationally and trying to sort of find that national alignment. And there may be opportunities in the licensing world where we may see that, but we need to recognize there are still, there's still significant, state, federal, challenges that we're all trying to navigate together. But someday we'll probably look back on this and say how far we've come.
Anybody else in the back standing? Appreciate you guys. Without a chair, I gotta get you guys a couple questions back here.
I wanted to ask about the recent memo from the FDA where they're outlining how the jurisdiction over cannabis and hemp falls under the FDA and what that looks like for the future of the MED and regulation in Colorado.
So Jim's going to put you in touch with somebody at the Department of Agriculture.
That sounds like, I'll give you my card, you can send me the, send me the FDA deal. But again,
Use the microphone.
This is a complex conversation, and we're going to, certainly MED is going to be engaged in this over the coming couple of years as this gets built out. And I'd be curious as to get a little bit more from you when we go offline.
All right, Jay, I'll give you the last question here.
In 2009, when this industry began to blow up in Colorado, the state of Colorado made a really historic decision. They could have very easily said, our law does not allow for dispensaries and commercial grow operations, we're going to shut this down. But instead, they made history by saying, let's see how we can figure this out. And it hasn't been easy, but the state of Colorado and the MED has moved forward and has helped build this industry and set a model for people nationally and worldwide. So in the spirit of bold moves and continuing to be bold, I have to ask, it's a selfish question, but it's something I think about a lot, and maybe a lot of people in this room think a lot. Whenever I'm at DIA or any airport, it's just wall-to-wall bars. I mean, wall-to-wall bottles of liquor. When are we as weary business travelers going to have the opportunity to not only consume, but maybe, purchase an edible before our flight at DIA? And, to my neighbor's point, they are, doing that in Canada. They're starting to set up, areas at airports in Canada where people can consume cannabis before a flight. And as a traveler that loves to consume cannabis before a flight, I think it's a beautiful thing.
Jim? We need a date, actually, for that. We're going to need a date.
What's your name? You're an OG, obviously. No, I thought you were setting this up with this perfect sort of, summary, and it all sounded sort of, butterflies and unicorns and everything, and then you set up this final, clearly that's outside of our box. That's first of all that I'll tell you. But opinions only. No, we don't do opinions like that. I'm very conscious of, but at the end of the day, this is a policy question, and I think at MED we're conscious of that we're watching the General Assembly create continue to evolve the framework over the last few years in a responsible way. We have a new administration with some new perspectives, and I think these are issues that I'm sure are going to continue to percolate, and I would encourage you to engage in that conversation. Let me put on the former director of marijuana coordination.
So this is one of those moments where you say, we're going to put you in touch with Ashley Elroy at the city of Denver.
Yeah, there you go.
So this speaks to one of the characteristics of our framework with both state and local model here, where if we're talking about businesses and various locations, the local jurisdiction is an important party to that conversation. Now, at an airport, I don't know if there's some federal legal issues associated with that as well.
Yeah, do the math.
All right, so within a year is what I got out of there. All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming out and talking to us. Everybody, we're going to have the bar open back up again. Let's give them a round of applause.